1960s Britain built some of the most desirable luxury cars on earth. Jaguar, Rolls-Royce, Rover, and Daimler carried names that meant wealth, status, and engineering pride. But not every badge lived up to its promise. Some cars arrived with genuine ambition and simply couldn't deliver. Others were undone by price, by outdated thinking, or by a boardroom decision made years before the car ever reached a showroom. Behind the walnut and leather, several of Britain's grandest 1960s cars quietly became cautionary tales. Let's see which one disappointed buyers more than any other, starting with number 10. Number 10. Wolseley 6110. The Wolseley 6110 wore the Mark's traditional illuminated badge and walnut trim, promising old-world dignity for buyers stepping up from lesser saloons. Underneath, though, it was an Austin Westminster in a smarter suit, sharing its Farina styling and 2.9-litre straight-six with humbler BMC stablemates. For a car marketed on distinction, that was already an awkward starting point. But the badge wasn't the real problem. Road testers of the era found the cam and lever steering vague and imprecise, hardly fitting for a car pitched at discerning drivers. The dashboard layout was cramped, and switchgear placement risked catching a driver's fingers on the indicator stalk. On paper, the 6110 looked every inch a gentleman's saloon. In daily use, it felt like exactly what it was, a mildly dressed-up Austin. Would a buyer paying a premium over the standard Westminster have felt shortchanged? Many clearly did, and Wolseley's badge-engineered strategy would only grow more transparent as the decade wore on. The next car set its sights far higher, and fell even further. Number 9. Alvis TE21, TF21. Alvis had spent decades building a reputation for handsome, coach-built 3-litre Tourers, and by 1963 the TE21 seemed to prove the formula still worked. Stacked headlamps, park-ward bodywork, and a 130 brake horsepower straight-six gave it real presence alongside Jaguar and Aston Martin. But there was a problem money alone couldn't fix. Hand-built construction meant tiny volumes. Only 353 TE21s were completed before the 1966 TF21 arrived with 150 brake horsepower and a genuine 120 miles per hour top speed. It was, by some margin, the fastest Alvis ever built. And yet barely 106 were made. The car cost more than comparable Jaguars and Mercedes, without offering meaningfully more performance or refinement to justify it. Would a buyer have chosen handmade exclusivity over a faster, cheaper XK-engined rival? Increasingly, the answer was no. When Rover absorbed Alvis in 1967, there was no room in the new British Leyland order for a low-volume coach-built saloon. Production simply stopped, marking a quiet, dignified end to nearly 50 years of Alvis motoring. Money troubles would prove even more brutal for the next name on this list. Number 8. Gordon-Keeble GK1. On paper, nothing in Britain matched the Gordon-Keeble GK1. Batoned styling, a 4.6-litre Chevrolet V8, and a de Dion rear axle gave it 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 7 seconds and a 142 miles per hour top speed quicker than the contemporary Aston Martin DB4. Autocars testers were thoroughly impressed. But the ambition ran ahead of the finances. The company priced the car at under £3,000, a figure that sounded competitive but barely covered production costs. Building fewer than 3 cars a week left no margin for error, and cash flow problems overwhelmed the tiny slough operation within a year of launch. The firm collapsed in 1965, was briefly revived, and finally folded for good with only around 100 cars ever completed. Would a wealthy buyer have gambled on a car this fast from a company this fragile? Very few did, and fewer still could find one to buy even if they wanted to. It remains one of Britain's great what-if stories, a genuinely brilliant car killed by an unrealistic price tag rather than any fault of its engineering. Number 7. Humber Imperial. By 1964, Roots needed to breathe new life into its aging Super Snipe range, and the answer was the Humber Imperial, revived from a 1950s name and dressed with reclining seats, power steering and self-leveling suspension by coach builder Thrupp Maberly. The advertising promised a new conception of executive luxury. The reality was more complicated. Roots had recently fallen under Chrysler's control, and with the Super Snipes underpinnings already a decade old, the Imperial was fundamentally a heavy facelift rather than a genuine flagship. Sales, which had once reached 6,500 to 7,500 cars a year, had collapsed to barely 1,000 annually by the mid-1960s as buyers drifted toward Rover, Triumph and Vanden Plas. Would a customer paying top money have noticed the Imperial's aging bones beneath its new leather? Reviewers certainly did. By March 1967, Roots discontinued the Imperial alongside the Super Snipe, entirely a quiet admission that reviving an old name couldn't disguise an old car. The next entry made exactly the same mistake, but with a far more famous badge attached. Number 6. Daimler Majestic Major. Few British engines of the 1960s could match Edward Turner's 4.6-litre V8, a genuine 220 brake horsepower powerplant capable of pushing the Daimler Majestic Major to 120 miles per hour, quicker than the far more famous Jaguar Mark 10. It should have been a triumph. Instead, it became one of the decade's most overlooked cars. The problem wasn't the engineering. It was timing and ownership. Jaguar had acquired Daimler in 1960, chiefly for factory space rather than any interest in Daimler's engines, and the Majestic Major's formal, upright styling already looked old-fashioned beside Jaguar's own low, wide Mark 10. Marketed half-heartedly and never seriously pushed abroad, it sold in painfully small numbers, just 1,180 saloons over 8 years, alongside 864 long-wheelbase DR for 50 limousines. Would a buyer have known this understated saloon could out-accelerate cars costing far more? Almost none did. Jaguar quietly let production wind down in 1968 rather than invest further in a rival V8 it never truly wanted. A brilliant engine, buried inside a company that had already decided not to care. Number 5. Austin 3 Litre. If forgotten British luxury cars needed a poster child, this could be it. Announced at the 1967 London Motor Show, the Austin 3 Litre was meant to rival the Rover P5B and Triumph 2500 with a genuinely executive package power steering, self-leveling suspension and switchable overdrive. But nearly everything about it went wrong before it even reached buyers. First shown as a prototype back in 1963, it was delayed for years and finally launched looking dated on arrival. Under the bonnet sat a detuned 2.9-litre 6 producing just 124 brake horsepower. A unit autocar had already dismissed as underpowered in another application entirely. Hauling nearly 1.5 tons of car, plus 2 separate hydraulic pumps for its steering and suspension, performance never matched the price tag. Would a business buyer have chosen this over a proven Rover for barely less money? Almost nobody did. British Leyland's own dealers struggled to explain what the car was actually for, and it was quietly dropped in 1971. Few 1960s British cars promised so much prestige and delivered so little of it. Number 4. Vanden Plas Princess for Litre R. This was, quite literally, a Rolls-Royce engine wearing a BMC body. The Princess for Litre R emerged from an abandoned partnership codenamed Java, originally intended to create a smaller, cheaper Bentley for younger executive buyers. When Rolls-Royce withdrew, BMC pressed ahead alone, fitting the compact Austin Westminster shell with a 3.9-litre Rolls-Royce FB60 alloy 6 producing 175 brake horsepower. On paper, this was remarkable engineering democratized for a wider market. In reality, the car struggled from the start. Reliability problems dogged the drivetrain, and BMC's dealer network simply couldn't offer the ownership experience buyers expected at this price. Priced almost level with a Jaguar Mark 10, yet lacking Jaguar's international reach or reputation, the Princess R never stood a real chance. After an encouraging initial surge, sales slowed dramatically. Only around 6,500 were built before production quietly ended in 1968. Would a wealthy buyer have trusted a Rolls-Royce engine bolted into an ordinary saloon body? Clearly, most preferred the real thing. Number 3 raises the stakes considerably, with an even more famous name attached. Number 3. Rover P5B. The Rover P5B deserves real respect, a genuinely accomplished car with an all-aluminium BIC-derived V8, favored by the Queen and by successive prime ministers through the 1970s. Yet even Rover's own admirers concede it carried a persistent image problem throughout the decade it was meant to define. Launched in 1958 and only lightly updated since, the P5's upright, three-box styling already looked conservative beside Jaguar's swooping Mark 10 and, later, the E-Type-inspired XJ6. By the time the 3.5-litre V8 version arrived in 1967, buyers associated the shape with a fading, paternalistic Britain rather than the modern executive world it was meant to serve. Would a younger businessman climbing the corporate ladder have chosen this over something sharper looking from Jaguar or Triumph? Increasingly, style mattered more than substance, and Rover's reluctance to modernize the P5 silhouette left a genuinely excellent car looking older than its rivals throughout the entire decade. It was a disappointment of perception rather than engineering, and perception, in the luxury market, decides almost everything. Number 2. Riley 472. Riley had once meant something distinct: sporting saloons with genuine engineering pedigree. By the 1960s, that identity had all but disappeared. The Riley 472 was, underneath its chrome grille and walnut dashboard, essentially a Morris Oxford wearing a Riley badge, sharing its bodyshell with the Milligram Magnet and Wolseley 1560. BMC pitched it as a flagship blending Wolseley luxury with Milligram performance. Buyers weren't convinced. A 472 cost around 20% more than an equivalent Milligram Magnet, for a car that was mechanically almost identical. Consumers Association testing in 1962 rated it poorly against European rivals like the Peugeot 403 and Volkswagen 1500, criticizing soft, wallowing handling that undercut any sporting pretense. Would a buyer paying that premium have felt they'd bought genuine Riley engineering, or simply a more expensive Oxford? By 1968, the 472 was selling barely 4 cars a day. Production limped on until 1969, when Riley, once one of Britain's proudest marques, was quietly discontinued altogether. One badge's death made way for the decade's most spectacular single failure. Number 1. Jaguar Mark 10. 6 months after the E-Type stunned the world, Jaguar unveiled its new flagship saloon, codenamed Zenith. Sir William Lyons wanted a car built specifically to conquer America, vast, opulent, and technically sophisticated beyond anything Coventry had built before. It should have been the E-Type's equal in ambition. Instead, it became Jaguar's most painful commercial misjudgment of the decade. At nearly 2 meters wide, the Mark 10 was enormous even by American standards, yet its styling struck US buyers as old-fashioned rather than daring. By 1963, Jaguar's own American distributor was reportedly calling it the Lemon. Worse, its 3.8-litre XK engine, borrowed from the E-Type, couldn't credibly deliver the performance such an imposing car promised. A 1966 facelift renamed it the 420G and added detail changes, but sales never recovered. By 1969, barely 30 cars a week were leaving Coventry. Would American buyers have chosen this over a Cadillac costing roughly the same money? Overwhelmingly, they didn't. Lyons himself later admitted the car had simply misjudged its market. Britain's most ambitious 1960s luxury saloon became its most complete letdown. 10 cars, 10 different kinds of disappointment. Some failed through outdated engineering, others through boardroom neglect, badge engineering, or simple mistiming. What's striking is how rarely bad build quality was the real culprit. The Majestic Major had a superb engine, the Gordon-Keeble was genuinely fast, and the Rover P5B was a fine car wearing the wrong decade's clothes. Sometimes the greatest disappointment wasn't a poorly made car at all, but a good one arriving at precisely the wrong moment, or abandoned before it ever got the chance to prove itself. Which of these 10 surprised you most? Let us know in the comments below. If forgotten British motoring history interests you, there's plenty more waiting on Britain Rewind. Until then, keep looking backwards. Some of Britain's finest stories were quietly disappointing all along.